he continues, although this is a pre-wrath website, I thought it would be helpful to present a clear presentation of a pre-tribulation rapture for people to compare with a pre-wrath one. Although I respect Christians who hold a pre-tribulation view, he didn't add the word view there, but I think that's what he's meaning. Although I respect Christians who hold a pre-tribulation view, I see this view difficult for a number of reasons. And then what he's going to do for us, and then this will draw his blog part to a close. We're going to return to his notes in the future when I turn to topic 11, which is making a case for the pre-wrath view. We're going to borrow some more of his resources. But for now, since we're just doing the overview, I'm only doing this particular blog part that talks about that explains pre-trib rapture so that we can better determine whether or not it is pre-trib that's more accurate or one of the other views. What Brother Eggman does for us now is he has this chart that depicts some of the major differences of how pre-wrath and pre-tribulation define key end time passages. So let me switch over to a different tab because this particular view that I'm using doesn't show enough information for me to see. So let me switch to this view. This is the same webpage. This is Brother Eggman's listing of a table of definitions on key terms and events that take place in relation to rapture and the 70th week. And he separates the two terms by the definitions of pre-tribulation view on the left and pre-wrath definition on the right. And so for this next exercise, I don't think I'll finish this unless I just read it nonstop. What I'm going to do is read down through the definitions of what pre-tribbers say is happening, and then I'm going to read Brother Eggman's definition of what pre-wrath. And so what this will do is this will whet our appetite towards the pre-wrath perspective without fully turning into it just yet. But what this will do is for those of you who have been kind of chomping at the bit to have me explain what pre-wrath is all about, Brother Eggman will give this bit of sneak preview for us. So the first topic is the day of the Lord. According to pre-tribulation, this is the period of time after the pre-tribulation rapture up until God's wrath has been fully poured out. Some see that the day of the Lord also includes the millennial reign of Christ. There are no signs or events that need to happen before this event can occur. So the day of the Lord is really synonymous with the wrath of God, which is synonymous with the tribulation itself. So most of the day of the Lord runs 7 years long, according to pre-tribbers. By comparison, the pre-wrath model, let me scroll up a little bit, says the day of the Lord refers to the coming of the Lord and believers being gathered to him. And there are a healthy number of biblical references in this definition from a pre-wrath perspective. I'm not going to read all the references. I'll just mention the names of the books. You'll have to go back and look them up on your own or follow this video so you can see which references are what. Or go to Brother Eggman's, best yet, go to Brother Eggman's blog resource website, prewrathresource.wordpress.com, and look this study up on your own and study it. The day of the Lord refers to the coming of the Lord and believers being gathered to him, 2 Thessalonians, as well as the wrath of God on the Antichrist, his kingdom, and his followers. It is a day of judgment and destruction on the ungodly, 2 Peter. This day begins after the signs in the heavens, which is the sun turning to darkness, the moon turning to the color of blood, and stars falling from the sky. And then we have a lot of references. Joel 2, Isaiah 13, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Mark 13, Revelation 6. And then it's these signs that begin in the heavens with Jesus returning on the clouds and rapturing the saints. So the day of the Lord begins on the same day that the rapture took place. Understand they're back-to-back events, according to the pre-wrath model. The day of the Lord ends after the battle of Armageddon, when the wrath of God has been fully poured out. Okay, let's keep going. The next topic is the Great Tribulation. According to the pre-trib model, Daniel's 70th week, which lasts exactly 7 years, also called the hour of trial in Revelation 3, and a time of suffering and wrath in 1 Thessalonians 5, right? That's what the Great Tribulation is according to the pre-trib model. The wrath of God and the tribulation are the same thing. The wrath refers to both the rule of Satan and the wrath of God. it begins the revealing of the Antichrist by his confirming a covenant with many. What follows is the rule of the Antichrist, man of lawlessness, the cruelest man in history. He will be ruling as the wrath of God is simultaneously being poured out, per Daniel 12 and Luke 21. So that's the pre-trib understanding of the Great Tribulation. Now, let's read the pre-wrath understanding of the same topic, the Great Tribulation. Here's what Brother Eggman says concerning the Great Tribulation from a pre-wrath perspective. The Great Tribulation is the final 3.5 prophetic years of Daniel's 70th week, also called the Great Distress, Matthew 24. This begins when the man of lawlessness is revealed. Satan pours out his wrath during the Great Tribulation, using the man of lawlessness as an instrument to persecute Christians and Jews. It is not God's wrath being poured out on the saints. Notice that differentiation right there. It's a very strong, marked difference from pre-trib to pre-wrath, is that pre-wrath says no, Satan's tribulation and God's wrath are two different things. Let's keep reading. According to Brother Eggman, speaking of the tribulation, it is a time of peace and safety for those who follow the man of lawlessness, but a time of persecution and great distress for Christians. Reference 1 Thessalonians 5, Luke 17. He continues, the Great Tribulation lasts until Jesus cuts short those days of distress, comes back to gather Christians, and pours out his wrath on the earth. Read Daniel 7, as well as Daniel 9 and Daniel 12, 2 Thessalonians 2, and Revelation 12. All right, as well as 13. So that's the tribulation. Let's keep reading. Let's talk about the rapture itself. This is according to pre-tribbers, and this is Brother Eggman's chart that's showing the differences between the pre-trib view of these events, which is the perspective in the middle or on the left, depending on the way you're looking at the chart, and the perspective on the right is the pre-wrath perspective of those same topics. So, when it comes to rapture, according to pre-trib rapture belief system, an event that occurs before the beginning of the last 7 years. That's the rapture. It can happen at any moment. It's a secret event where Christians disappear from the earth, and everyone on earth is left wondering what happened. Notice those defining features. It's at the beginning of the 7 years. It's imminent, right? Meaning it could happen even before I finish this sentence. And it's a secret event, right? Those are very key details of the pre-trib rapture belief system. This is not, it says, considered the coming of Jesus. So Jesus coming and the rapture are two different events by pre-trib perspective. I might add that mid-trib, pre-wrath, and post-trib to some extent also separate those two events. However, it's the post-trib that really combines them in such a way that they're basically simultaneous. But the other three really have more of a hard separation between rapture versus second coming. Our references were in Matthew 24, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, and Revelation 4 and chapter 12. Okay, let's look now at this same topic, the rapture, through the lens of a pre-wrath perspective. According to pre-wrath, the rapture occurs when the sign of the Son of Man appears in the sky, and Jesus comes with the clouds of heaven with a trumpet blast. Jesus sends his angels to gather Christians from the earth to meet him in the clouds. That's rapture. The dead in Christ rise first, and then those who are left alive will also meet him. In a twinkling of an eye, we are changed and receive a new body. During this event, every eye on earth will see Jesus and mourn. Notice the contrast between a secret rapture and the very visible rapture by the pre-wrath perspective. During this event, every eye on earth will see Jesus and mourn. And now we have some references. Matthew 24 with numerous places there. 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, 2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation 1, Revelation 6, Revelation 7, Revelation 14. So lots of passages to support the perspective that the rapture is not a secret event. It's not at the very beginning of the 7-year tribulation, and it is not imminent. There are lots of signs that precede it, things like that. Let's keep reading. Now let's talk about the coming of Jesus. When we say the coming of Jesus, we're talking about one event that has two, how do I say this? One time period that has two events connected to it. At least that's the description that I'm giving it. So let me show you this too from the chart perspective in case you're not following along. If you look at the pre-trib chart and consider that large slice in the middle known as God's wrath, also known as the tribulation, that entire 7-year period, according to pre-trib, can't really be the coming of Jesus. So instead, what the pre-trib does is they basically split the coming of Jesus into two really comings. The first coming at the beginning of the tribulation, known as rapture, and the second coming at the far end of the 7 years, known as just that, the second coming. So in their view, they're comfortable with describing a first and second coming, or really, if you want to get technical, when he came into the world 2,000 years ago, that was the first coming. The rapture would be the second coming, and the second coming would be the third coming, right? 1, 2, 3. Something to that effect. But either way, the two events are separated by so many years, 7 to be exact. They're separated by so many years that they're essentially two separate events. But when we look at some of the other views, such as mid-trib, the separation is only 3.5 years. So now what we can do is we can begin to call the time period between the two events of rapture and second coming, we can call that the coming of Christ. We can call that the second coming or something that about the parousia is the Greek term that we had been researching. I'll just show you this real quick. It's the first tab I have open. Parousia is Greek, Strong's number 3952. It refers to a presence or a coming. Parousia is the presence or coming or arrival or advent, especially of the second coming of Christ. And the nuance of the word includes both the movement as well as the presence itself. So it's used in a number of places in the Bible. I'm scrolling down through this reference just so you can see a lot of those places. A lot of them are in Matthew 24. And when we're talking about the coming, we have our 1 Corinthians 15 passages as well. But the idea of parousia, the reason why I'm highlighting this, the idea of parousia is that according to most eschatological teachers, end-time teachers, there's only one coming of Christ. And rightfully so, because the Bible only references Christ coming once. So this creates a bit of a problem and challenge to the pre-trib view that separates these two events by so much time as to virtually be describing two separate comings, even though the Bible only describes Jesus coming once. So what do we make of that? The other models avoid that confusion by calling the wrath of God or the day of the Lord the coming of Christ, and simply attaching the wrath on the front end and the second coming on the back end, but it's still one event known as the coming of the Lord. When we look at the post-trib rapture, this simply avoids the pre-trib mistake by really basically combining the rapture with the second coming. And so it's easy to call that one event because there's only one quick motion up into the air and then a quick drop back down to planet Earth. So it's easy to see this as one coming of Christ. In other words, it's separated from the wrath of God altogether. However, by comparison, when we look at the pre-wrath model, the one that I hold to and the one that Brother Eggman holds to as well, when we look at God's wrath known as the day of the Lord, we can call that the coming of Christ, the second coming. That event of God's wrath being poured out along with the day of the Lord, that event is known as the coming of Christ, the second coming. And there's only one of them. And I keep using the word second coming, even though the second coming is also a label given to the far end event at Armageddon. So what we do biblically is we recognize that there's kind of a technical use of this word parousia, and a non-technical as well that's found in extra biblical writings. And the non-technical and technical bear the understanding that we're talking about one event that has these details attached to it of a prominent ruler traveling to a city and the people going out to meet him. And part of that includes the itinerary of that prominent leader touring around the city, right? That's all part of the parousia. His presence, his coming, his arrival, his itinerary, the fact that he's with us, all of that is wrapped up in that technical term as well as non-technical. It goes both ways of parousia. So instead of just calling it the second coming of Christ, we can just call it the parousia. And that effectively clears up some of the confusion that when we talk about the parousia now in the pre-wrath model, the rapture is the front part of the parousia, the beginning of the parousia of Christ, and the second coming is the ending, or could be a significant part of the parousia. According to this chart, some pre-wrathers and pre-tribbers extend the presence of Christ all the way through the millennium. If you want to take that perspective, I'm fine with that as well. It just doesn't show it on this chart. So that's kind of what's going on. So let's go back to Brother Eggman and keep reading some of these comparisons. I don't know if we'll finish all of this. We're at about 3 minutes left into the study. So when we're talking about the coming of Jesus, think parousia. The pre-trib splits it into two events. One's called the rapture, the other's called the glorious hope, the glorious appearing after the rapture. At the end of the final 3.5 years, references Matthew 24. By comparison, the pre-wrath model says that regarding the coming of Jesus, aka the parousia, Jesus comes back after the days of the Great Tribulation are cut short and signs appear in the sun, moon, and stars. Jesus' coming is initiated when Jesus comes with the clouds of heaven and every eye sees Jesus. At this time, Jesus sends forth his angels to gather Christians to meet him in the clouds. Jesus' coming continues through the day of the Lord, which includes the Battle of Armageddon, and, Brother Eggman notes, the 1,000-year reign when Jesus sets up his kingdom upon earth. And we have the reference to Matthew 24 as well. So, in Brother Eggman's view, the second coming, or the coming of Jesus, includes the day of the Lord, wrath of God being poured out, as well as the rapture on the front end and the second coming on the back end, but it also extends to include all of the millennium. That's his perspective. I don't know if Marv Rosenthal, the father of the pre-wrath view, along with Robert Van Kampen, also one of the fathers of the pre-wrath view, I don't know if they also would describe the second coming including the millennium. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and check my books that I have sitting on my bookshelf here. But we'll talk about that in time. And then I think I have just enough time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I'm not going to finish this tonight, but I do have enough time to read about the wrath of God, and then we'll break it off right here and pick this up next week. So we're looking at the pre-trib rapture perspective on some of these terms. The wrath of God now is, according to the pre-trib view, it is occurring during the Great Tribulation period. So they are synonymous. They overlap with one another. Wrath of God, Great Tribulation. And the time frame is all of the 7 years of Daniel's 7th week, and the wrath of God includes the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, etc. So all of that is the wrath of God from the pre-trib perspective. By comparison, and we'll close with this tonight, looking at this wrath of God through the lens of the pre-wrath model that I hold to, as well as Brother Aaron Eggman. This is his website resource that we're utilizing. The wrath of God begins at the 6th seal when it says, quote, "The great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" Speaking of the Lamb, the Father, the one who sits on the throne, and of the Lamb. I'm putting the context back in. That's a quote from Revelation chapter 6. According to Brother Eggman and the wrath of God and the pre-wrath view, this is the time when Jesus comes back on a cloud, having shortened the days of the final 3.5 years for the sake of the elect. His wrath includes the 6th and 7th seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, and ends with the Battle of Armageddon. That's the wrath of God. So by comparison, so I'll show you the chart one more time, and then we'll stop here. We'll pick this up next week with the elect, starting there. When we look at the chart of what was just described, you can see that on the far right of your chart, the wrath of God is a lot smaller than it is on the pre-trib chart. The wrath of God, according to pre-wrath model, has the rapture taking place between the Great Tribulation and the day of the Lord. So it's the rapture that cuts short the wrath of God cuts short the Great Tribulation and initiates the day of the Lord, which is God's wrath. So in this view, the 1 Thessalonians 5:9 passage where Paul told us that we Christians are not appointed under wrath, this is how we can best understand this verse in its most natural sense. God is going to rapture true believers from earth after going through tribulation, but prior to experiencing the wrath of God, which is defined as punishment against unrepentant sinners, as well as the extended mechanism used to bring unrepentant Israel to her knees and separate her from the remnant of Israel. So you understand what I'm saying there? There's some purposes why God raptures believers off of the earth after the tribulation, but prior to the wrath being poured out. That's why the pre-wrath position, where it gains its name. We are raptured prior to the wrath being poured out, but after the tribulation. So in this way, you could say that we are post-trib, we pre-wrathers. If we redefine the word tribulation to limit it to the smaller time frame that kicks off after the midpoint of the week, but is cut short by the wrath of God, the day of the Lord, then we pre-wrathers can also describe ourselves as post-tribbers without being confused with, let me scroll down and show you, scroll up, without being confused with the classic post-trib definition, which has tribulation and God's wrath running the entire 7-year time period by most classic post-tribbers, and the rapture not taking place until after the 7 years. So those are the views that we're comparing and contrasting. Let me just park our picture at the pre-trib so we can be prepared for next week. We're going to keep looking at this pre-trib view. We're defining some of the key points and terms of the pre-trib view so that you can have a better understanding when we finally turn into the pre-wrath view in topic 11 coming down the road in my studies here. We will have already investigated the pre-trib view, which is the most popular view in Christian circles today. And we're now looking at whether or not this view is one that can withstand the scrutiny of Scripture. But we'll have to wait in time to see. But that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events.